What if the most terrifying thing about The Shining wasn't Jack Torrance's descent into madness, but what happened to the woman playing his wife? Today we're exploring how Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece was built on Shelley Duvall's suffering and whether brilliance can ever justify breaking someone. The Shining follows Jack Torrance, a recovering alcoholic and aspiring writer who takes a job as the winter caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel in the Colorado Rockies. He brings along his wife Wendy and their young son Danny, who possesses psychic abilities called the Shining. As winter sets in and the family becomes snowed in, Jack's mental state deteriorates. He becomes violent and begins seeing ghosts from the hotel's dark past, eventually turning on his family with an axe. Wendy must fight to protect herself and Danny as Jack fully descends into madness. Before The Shining, Shelley Duvall was a respected actress who had won Best Actress at Cannes for Three Women and earned critical acclaim for her quirky, naturalistic performances in Robert Altman films. She hosted Saturday Night Live, created the beloved fairy tale theater, and brought an offbeat charm to every role. She wasn't just another actress, she was an artist with range, intelligence, and a unique screen presence that made her unforgettable. Then came Stanley Kubrick. The filming of The Shining took 56 weeks, over a year, to complete, when it was originally scheduled for just 17 weeks. Duvall and Nicholson worked up to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Kubrick's highly methodical approach required countless retakes, refusing to print anything until at least the 35th take. He even earned a mention in the Guinness Book of Records for most retakes for one scene with dialogue, a scene with Scatman Crothers and child actor Danny Lloyd that was shot 148 times. The baseball bat stairway scene alone was shot 127 times over 3 weeks. By the end, Duvall's hands were blistered and raw from gripping the bat, her voice was hoarse from screaming, and her body was completely dehydrated. Duvall told Roger Ebert in December 1980 that the work was almost unbearable. She had to cry 12 hours a day for the last 9 months straight, 5 or 6 days a week. Her role required her to run around carrying young Danny Lloyd while crying and screaming. 30 or 35 takes, running and crying and carrying a little boy, it gets hard, Duvall said. To reach the correct emotional state, she would listen to sad songs on her Sony Walkman and relive unhappy memories. You just think about something very sad in your life or how much you miss your family or friends, she explained, but after a while, your body rebels. It says, stop doing this to me. I don't want to cry every day, and sometimes just that thought alone would make me cry. To wake up on a Monday morning so early and realize that you had to cry all day because it was scheduled, I would just start crying. Kubrick treated Duvall differently than other cast members. According to his daughter Vivian's behind-the-scenes documentary, he commanded the crew not to show any sympathy for Duvall and asked them to ignore her completely to push her into emotional distress. He never complimented her scenes, while constantly praising Nicholson, who sat right next to her. This intensive isolation and psychological manipulation were too stressful for Duvall to bear. Her hair began falling out and she was in and out of health, pushed to her very threshold. Angelica Houston, Nicholson's live-in girlfriend at the time, remembered the two men ganging up on Duvall. I got the feeling that Shelley was having a hard time just dealing with the emotional content of the piece, and they didn't seem to be all that sympathetic. It seemed to be a little bit like the boys were ganging up, Houston recalled. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Jack Nicholson's unhinged performance earned him universal praise. Nicholson himself admitted that Kubrick was a completely different director with Duvall and told her, I don't know how you do it. But Duvall's raw, visceral portrayal, the film received 2 controversial nominations at the first Golden Raspberry Awards in 1981, Worst Director and Worst Actress for Duvall. Author Stephen King criticized the casting, stating Duvall's Wendy was basically just there to scream and be stupid, calling it a misogynistic portrayal that differed completely from his novel. While Nicholson was celebrated for his intensity, Duvall was mocked for her fragility, the very vulnerability Kubrick had deliberately extracted from her. In 2022, the Razzie Committee officially rescinded Duvall's nomination, acknowledging that her performance was impacted by Kubrick's treatment throughout production. But the damage was done. For decades, she carried the stigma of being difficult or unstable, rather than being recognized as a woman pushed beyond her limits. After The Shining, Duvall didn't quit acting immediately. She continued for over 20 years. But something had fundamentally changed. She eventually retired from Hollywood in 2002 and moved to Blanco, Texas, narcissist, struggling with mental health issues, and living on a small social security check. Her controversial 2016 appearance on Dr. Phil, where she discussed delusions and mental illness, led many to believe her problems stemmed directly from The Shining. The truth is more complex. In her final years, Duvall repeatedly defended Kubrick, calling him warm and friendly behind the scenes and saying they would spend hours conversing while the crew waited impatiently. She admitted he was unnecessarily hard, cruel, and abusive during shooting, but said he perpetrated the same abuse that had been imposed on him in the past. At 74, she reflected that she wouldn't change anything about making the film, saying the grueling process was somehow cathartic. Every time she went home after those intense days, she felt at ease. But does her defense erase the harm? Or does it reveal how deeply complicated trauma and artistic dedication can be? Critics initially panned The Shining, but it has since been critically reappraised as one of the greatest horror films of all time. Martin Scorsese listed it as one of his favorites, calling it terrifying because what one cannot see or comprehend shadows every move the characters make. Film critic Ann Bilson praised Duvall's performance, stating her horrified reactions provide many of the film's iconic moments. Other critics have called it one of the best performances in horror film history, with Duvall serving as the emotional heart of the movie. Younger audiences are reclaiming Duvall's legacy, recognizing that her performance wasn't weak, it was devastatingly real. The internet has transformed her from punchline to icon, with tributes flooding social media after her death in July 2024. We're finally asking the right questions. Can we separate art from its creation? Should we celebrate a masterpiece built on someone's breakdown? Shelley Duvall deserved better. Not just from Kubrick, not just from Hollywood, but from all of us who watched and didn't see her pain for what it was. This is Ladies First, watching women in movies. Here we empower women by reviewing and discussing films that highlight their stories, struggles, and achievements. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.